Kyle Klingman with Track Wrestling. We have a four-time national champion. He was a four-time NAIA wrestling champion for Simon Fraser, made the 2000 Olympic team for Canada. Now he is a dual head coach for one program, men's and women's, for Simon Fraser wrestling program. It's Justin Abdou. How are you, Justin?
I'm doing good, Kyle.
What holds your heart more, hockey or wrestling?
Oh, wrestling. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm a wrestling fanatic. I'm a wrestling fan. I'm also a full-time wrestling coach, so it all works out pretty good for me. I love all sports, and I'm a sporting enthusiast. I still play hockey, so I don't wrestle anymore. But, yeah, I coach it.
But didn't you grow up probably just having dreams of being a hockey player?
Yeah, well, I grew up in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, and that's Hockey Central. I mean, it'd be like a kid growing up in Iowa City for wrestling. So I played hockey all the way till I was 16. Played with some guys that made it to the NHL. When I was a kid, that was what we did. We played a lot of hockey at recess, at lunch hour. We'd go to the outdoor rink, played on traveling teams, went all over Canada and the United States playing hockey. So it was a big part of my life up until I was 16 years old.
Did you think you had a shot at making it to the NHL?
Yeah, I had a healthy amount of delusion. I definitely felt like I was a good player. I was a top player in every team I played on until I was about 15. 14, 15, I started playing up an age group. So for my last 3 years of hockey, I always played up one age group. And like I said, I played with some really phenomenal players, and it was a great experience.
Of course, Canada, it's like the national sport there. So how did wrestling get inserted into your life instead of hockey? I mean, if wrestling is replacing a major sport, how did wrestling occupy your thoughts?
Well, for me, I was always around wrestling. My father was a college wrestler. He was a football player wrestler, and then he coached wrestling. He was a teacher for a while, and I would go to the practices and sit on the side of the mat. And by the time I was 6, 7 years old, I was out there wrestling. But in Canada, it's not quite like the United States. Most of the wrestlers get exposed to the sport in high school. There's not a ton of kids wrestling outside of the Indo-Canadian community. There's a lot of young Indian kids wrestling. Their parents are from India. But for a lot of the white kids who are in Saskatchewan, where I was, most of the kids started in high school. So when I was 8, 9 years old, I started wrestling. I was a big kid, and I would be wrestling with these junior high school kids that my dad was coaching. And then a big turning point for me was 82 Worlds were in Edmonton. I was 11 years old, and my dad sent me up there on a bus, Greyhound bus. They had a situation where the kids at the camp could stay right in the dorms with the wrestlers. So I was, rubbing elbows with Dave Schultz and Lee Kemp and Randy Lewis, and I was 11 years old. And I just thought, man, it's a cool sport, and it's something I want to do.
How'd you get your information? Like, did Canada have a publication, or did you rely on U.S. publications? How did you kind of learn about the sport?
Yeah, this was pre-track wrestling days. So there wasn't even a lot of wrestling on the internet. So I'm not even sure there was internet. So what I would do was I started going to camps in the States, and the guys that I would get housed with, they all had USA Wrestler and Amateur Wrestling News. So I subscribed to both of those. I read them from cover to cover. 4 or 5 times a day I got them. Then I cut out the pictures and put them on my wall. And then we would get DVD or VHS tapes of guys doing clinics, and I'd watch a lot of those. And then there was a guy in Regina, Saskatchewan, who was a high school coach who worked as an office manager with the Hawkeyes during the Jay Robinson and Dan Gable eras when Jay and Dan were together. And he'd often bring guys up to do clinics. So I saw Ed Bannock do a clinic, and I saw Dave Schultz do a clinic. And this was when I was 12, 13, 14 years old.
When did you know you could transition that into being successful in college?
I didn't know I was going to be successful in college till I got to college. I definitely took a big jump. I was about 13, 14 years old, and I would start going down to Montana, made a bunch of connections there, and would stay there 2-3 months at a time training. And it was just a higher level than what we had in Canada at that time. And started having some success. I won a cadet world title. Placed at the Junior Worlds, and I had a pretty good feeling I was going to be a good college wrestler. But at that time, I'd only wrestled freestyle, so I didn't know a lot about it.
Well, what's that like though? I mean, so your first exposure to folk style wrestling was in the college room?
Oh, not in the room. We practiced freestyle. Our coach was American. He's Canadian now, but he was a two-time NCAA finalist for Oregon State. He lost two finals in his career to two legends. He lost to Carl Adams and he lost to Wade Chalice. So he had wrestled for Dale Thomas at Oregon State, and he took over the job at SFU when he was in his early 20s. But we just wrestled, and we wrestled freestyle. And it wasn't like we had a lot of skills in the folk style that we drilled in the room. We learned in the matches. I remember my first collegiate match I ever saw, I was in. So he said, hey, don't lock your hands and get off bottom. So, you know, I locked my hands 3 times and laid on bottom for about a minute and a half. And I figured about 15 matches into my career, I kind of had it figured out.
Of course, you're talking about Mike Jones. How would you describe Mike Jones to those who don't know him?
Oh, he's a hard guy to describe because he's one of a kind. He's a brutally honest man, and I think that people love that about him. He's hard on his athletes, but in a really good way. I think anyone who's ever wrestled for him has a tremendous amount of respect for him. He's very knowledgeable about the sport of wrestling, but more important than that, he's knowledgeable about human beings. He's a great motivator. He's just one of those guys that you want to get a pat on the back from him. And, you know, he's always going to challenge you to be a little bit better. So, I mean, remember when Agali came back from the Olympics and he said, the first thing he said to him is Canada's first ever Olympic gold medalist in wrestling. And Mike's first comment to him was, well, it didn't have to be so close.
So, I mean, he clearly had to have made adaptations, though, because he was men's and women's coach for a while, and then you took over. But how did he make those adaptations? How did he transition from going to women's wrestling?
Well, he kind of wrote me on that one because we were co-coaches at the time, and he said, you know, it's kind of time to split off. Do you want the girls or the guys? And so, I mean, I said the guys. I was a young guy, and I was still wrestling a lot. And I think he knew right away we were going to be great in women's wrestling. He was a pioneer. He had one of the first women's matches, possibly the first women's match ever in North America was conducted in our gym. He had a girl from Japan came over with the guys team, and she wasn't going to wrestle in the guys team, but she was one of these early wrestlers in Japan. And Tina Takahashi, who was Olympian in judo, whose brother is Ray, who was a 2-time Olympian in wrestling, happened to be in Vancouver training, and he talked her into putting on a singlet, and they had a match. And she was a world-class judoka, and she wrestled this Japanese girl. And to my knowledge, it was the first women's wrestling match at the elite level in Canada.
What was your college wrestling experience like, Justin?
It was great, actually. I really enjoyed wrestling folk style. Like I said, I hadn't wrestled it before, so for me, it kind of gave me a new life in wrestling where I was learning a different sport. So half the season I'd be wrestling folk style, and then I'd hit the ground running, go right into freestyle season, and it wasn't like a giant drain on me because it felt like a new season for me. And definitely my freshman year, I probably exceeded my expectation there, but I learned so much about the sport, and I kind of fell in love with college wrestling, and to the point now where I probably watch more folk style wrestling than I do freestyle wrestling.
How do you compartmentalize information, especially at that time, since I'm assuming you don't have all the access at that time to a lot of video, but how did you develop your skills so you could be a 4-time national champion eventually?
Well, we didn't have access to a lot of the video or stuff on, but what we had at the time was an incredibly strong wrestling room. We had the Birmingham Mountain Wrestling Club, which has been around since 1978, but it's basically very similar model with what everyone's doing in the United States now with the regional training centers. We had one half of the Canadian national wrestling team practicing in our room. So I had opportunities to wrestle Olympic medalists and world medalists every day. And I'd go to the tournament, and that would be the easy day for me. So practice became so difficult that the tournament was the fun part.
You went to a lot of these American tournaments, whether it was the Vegas Open or Sunkist and International, but did you feel a connection with U.S. wrestlers as you went along?
Oh, for sure, yeah. I mean, my freshman year, I wrestled at the USS bars, and my sophomore year, I wrestled at US University Nationals. Back then, the Canadians could wrestle, and I probably spent more time wrestling in the States from the time I was 14 on than I did in Canada anyways. Like I said, I developed a lot of relationships in Montana. Two families, the Campbells and the Zaddicks, kind of took me in, and they treated me like I was their own. And I would spend 3, 4, 5 months in the summer. As soon as hockey season was over, I packed my bag and I go on my wrestling journey. And I have as many friends in the United States in wrestling as I do in Canada. And I become, like I said, a giant fan of watching folk style wrestling at the Division I level.
How did Canadians view wrestling at that time? I mean, was it embraced? Because that was still early on. There wasn't a lot of international wrestling success. Were people understanding what you were doing with wrestling?
Well, I did come from a town, like I said, it was a hockey town, but there was a certain amount of wrestling legacy that had come out of my town. There was a guy who named Ray Lougheed who wrestled in the 1964 Olympics, I believe. And then my high school coach is a man named Terry Pace, and he placed 5th at the 76 Olympics. He's 20 years older than me, and we wrestled the same weight class. So, I mean, wrestling was a big thing in our town. It didn't rival hockey by any means, but everyone knew who the wrestlers were. And my high school team won a provincial title my senior season. So, wrestling was known.
What was it like when you won your 4th national championship? Did that get celebrated?
Definitely got celebrated because we won the team title. And it was 3 years where we kind of thought we had a chance and it never really came to fruition. I think we were 4th, 3rd, 4th or something. And then my senior year, we had a really good team and we won it all. And we had 3, 4 world-class wrestlers on that team. So it was a lot of fun to bring home a team title. It was only Mike's second one because they'd won it in '88. We had Jeff Toohey on that team who could just come back from Barcelona where he won a silver medal in the Olympics. We had a guy from Great Britain named John Mellion who was a 3-timer and 1-time second, lost in overtime. And then our 18-pounder was a world-class guy named Selwyn Tam who wrestled for Canada. So we could go out there against a lot of D1 teams and hold our own. I think we beat Syracuse and Clarion that year in dual meets. So it was a really fun year. 6 seniors on the team. We'd all kind of wrestled together on national teams and on the college circuit. So I think the big part of it all was just feeling like we finally delivered the team title back to Mike because we were so close for those years leading up.
You wrestled internationally for a long time, made world teams, of course, made that 2000 Olympic team. But how did you manage through that? Was that your full-time occupation? Did you work on the side? How were you able to just have a lifestyle and live and be financially solid during that time?
Well, I don't know if a lot of people know this, but the Canadian sports system set up pretty nicely if you make a national team. Back then, it's called carding. So if you were top 2 in Canada, you received a monthly stipend. I think I was on that stipend for 13 years. And I think the day I retired, they doubled it, something like that. But it was enough to help pay rent. And then I had a scholarship my 4 years of university. The minute I graduated, I became a kind of a volunteer assistant or a part-time assistant. I get paid for that, helping out with the team. By '94, it was a part-time job, and I always had little things going on the side. I used to sell wrestling shoes, everything, yeah.
How'd you sharpen your skills? Who'd you train with during those times you're making world and Olympic teams?
Mostly, I mean, a lot of the preparation we did was in the room here in Burnaby. We had a guy named Chris Wilson, who's 4 years older than I was, so we were never on a college team together. And he had a little stretch there, from 91 to 93, where he was one of the best pound-for-pound wrestlers twice at a time when Fedzai had never been beaten. He was a world bronze and a world silver. And he was 2 weights below me, but great workout partner for me. And above me, my weight class, I had a guy named Chris Rinke who got 3rd at the Olympics behind Mark Schultz in '84. And, there was a surrounding cast of 6, 8, 10 guys that were trying to make world Olympic teams between the weights of 150 to 198. And those were the guys that wrestled.
How do you think you would have done if you would have gotten an environment like Sunkist Kids, Hawkeye Wrestling Club, Oklahoma State, and trained for a solid Olympic cycle in that environment? Do you think it would have changed your results?
I don't know. It'd be, I'd hate to speculate on what might have been because I think we really did have a great atmosphere and a great room here. And I did get a lot of opportunities. So, I mean, in 95, we were at Foxcatcher for 2 weeks training. In 96, I was at Sunkist for 2 weeks training. I was never able to train with the Hawkeyes until 2008. We took our Olympic team guys there. It was pretty interesting to be in that atmosphere. I really enjoyed it. I think I would have thrived in an atmosphere like that, but I don't have a lot of regrets. I had a pretty good career and got to see the world and got to wrestle a lot of great wrestlers, some of my heroes.
Who were some of the toughest guys you competed against?
Well, for me, Kevin Jackson he wasn't an easy guy to wrestle, that's for sure. Incredibly powerful and incredibly fast, not to mention strong. So, I wrestled him a few times, and that wasn't easy. And Yoel Romero, I wrestled him a bunch. Also not an easy guy to wrestle, incredibly explosive, incredibly powerful. Les Gutches as well. I'd say Les is probably, he could change levels on you and drop underneath you as fast as anybody. I wrestled Satiev, which was, quite a bit different than I thought it would be. He did not feel strong, but he never stopped moving, and his hand fighting and just had me out balanced the whole time. He was a tough guy to wrestle for sure.
So as you're coaching right now, you had said that you don't like practices where it starts off with a meeting and you talk with the team afterward. Where did you develop that type of system where you just let them get going and then you talk to the team afterward?
I don't know. I might have picked that up through my hockey days because that's when you get in hockey, you come out of the dressing room and you hit the ice, you start skating, you start doing drills. If it's a scrimmage practice, you go right into scrimmage, and the meeting is always afterwards. Or even in the change room, they'll have the chalk talk. So I know a lot of wrestling coaches like to have guys sit down at the beginning and they talk about what they're going to do, or they do a little motivation. I think that I've just always wanted to get in the room and start scrapping. So that's kind of the way we do it here. We come in, we warm up, we get going, and then we talk after.
How do you manage that, having the men's and women's team? What's the practice schedule? I'm assuming you use the same wrestling room for both teams, but how do you manage both teams?
We go back to back. So our girls, they generally practice first, chivalry's not dead, ladies first. So they practice first, the guys come in after, and it would be an impossible situation if I didn't have a lot of help. So I got a lot of help. I got two great assistants on the men's side, and Tyler McLean and Clete Hansen. And then on the women's side, Mike Jones still comes to practice every day. I got Justina D'Estachio and Raj Verdi. We got a sporting cast of women that are going to try to make the Olympic team, Mallory Velte and Dawn Paris, to name a couple. And they're all in the room, and they make it easy because they're like player coach type people already.
Is there a separation you have to make going from freestyle to folk style? How do you change the coaching that you do from both women's to men's?
Just the practice structure is a lot different. We spend probably a lot more time with the guys doing top bottom. We do spend a lot of time in parterre wrestling freestyle as well. But I just think that the way when we did it growing up, the collegiate game there wasn't as big of a difference with the top bottom. Now you got the 4-point near fall. You got a lot of guys that they're making a living with their top games. So we've changed the way we do it, and we do spend a lot more time in the folk style room doing top bottom. We actually have top bottom practices.
You ever gotten in a moment where all of a sudden you're in a men's practice and you're like, oh my gosh, this is folk style. I've been coaching freestyle the whole time.
No, not really. I don't think that's ever happened, but I have been at a tournament before where I've been freestyle, folk style, and I'm calling for a ruling that's not right because I'm, looking for a step out in a folk style match.
What's the art to coaching freestyle? Because it certainly is different. I think the gap does continue to change. As you know, international rules change all the time, and it seems like we've been pretty solid lately, but what's the art to just really being a successful freestyle coach? Because you have a great women's program.
Yeah, that's a difficult question, but I'll take a shot at it. It's hard, first of all, to describe what freestyle is at any given moment because it seems like every 4 years the rules change. In my 12 years on the Canadian national team, I wrestled under 4 sets of rules. So I love the rules right now. I think they're as close to perfect as we've seen in my wrestling career. And they're also very conducive for a folk styler to transition over. I think that folk style and freestyle are as close as they've ever been. I think the big areas are obviously being able to get an athlete to develop a 4-point move, a feet to backer, something that you don't see as much of in folk style, and then obviously the parterre game. And a good collegiate wrestler could learn that in a year. But we spent a lot of time working across ankle gut wrench series and transitioning from the one to another, and our girls have had a lot of success in the U.S. college system with our top game.
Seems like there's a good culture for wrestling right now in Canada, where you've had some really good success, and particularly on the women's side. What is the culture right now in Canada? Do you feel like it's part of the general sporting community that they really grasp and really get behind wrestling in Canada?
Yeah, well, we've had a lot of success at the Olympic level. With the men early on, but now with the women winning medals. So it does have, the sport has the eye, and it also has some funding from our government. So our athletes are probably taken as good or better care of than they ever have been. There's more jobs in coaching, and there's more opportunities, especially for our women internationally. And we do have a very good women's team, top 5 in the world. We got a reigning Olympic champion. So yeah. Things are looking good for Canada. We got some really good up-and-comers on young wrestlers, both on the women's and the men's side. What's
your philosophy on recruiting?
Well, I like to get the best kids you can get, but so I mean that's pretty easy, because I think anybody who's recruiting says we want to get the best kids we can get. But one of the things at Simon Fraser, very difficult school academically. And that's kind of helped us, because we've always got really smart kids come from good families and like to work hard. So we have a system here when you come down to Simon Fraser that I believe can make you a very good wrestler and help you become very successful. So what we try to do is get the best student athlete we can get in here, and someone who's really, really willing to work and learn.
How long does it take for your athletes or even your assistant coaches to understand your witty personality and your sense of humor?
Well, there's some that have been around the program for like more than 10 years and they haven't figured it out yet. So I don't know. Yeah, no, we got, like I said, we have a very smart group of kids, and I find that we have all different kinds of sense of humors on both teams. The kids that I coach make me laugh more than I make them laugh. That's for sure.
What are facilities like there then? Do you have adequate facilities for what you need?
Yeah, we have a great facility. Our wrestling space right now, we're going to go back to the old wrestling room when the stadium's built, but we're in a gymnasium where we have 4 full mat surfaces. Yeah, we have great strength and conditioning program. We're going to get you up here one day and you're going to see it, but our university is located on the top of a mountain, and we have an overlook of the city of Vancouver on one side, and you can look over and see the inlet on the other side, and you can look out and see the United States of America on the other side. So it's a beautiful place to train. There's lots of nice trails, and it's a great place to go to school.
You have such great success with getting American athletes to go there. Just some of the biggest names have gone through Simon Fraser, whether it's Helen Maroulis or, you said, Mallory Velte, Victoria Anthony, just to name a few. But how are you getting them there? What's the pitch?
Well, that group that we had was exceptional. We had a team in early 2000s, I guess, early 2010, 2011, or whatever that years those were, where we had Daniel Lapidge, Justina D'Estasio, Vicky Anthony, and Helen all on the same team. And all 4 of them went on to become gold medalists. But the girls did a lot of the recruiting, and they still do. Our girls they're really keen on telling people how wonderful Vancouver is, and they share the words with the girls on the tours. And we've had a lot of people that have approached us that want to come here. The fact we're on the West Coast helps too. You know, there's a lot of people that like a West Coast lifestyle, and going back east might not be something that they want to do. And then Mike Jones. I mean, those girls all have a lot of respect for Mike, and he has a personal relationship with them all, and yeah, they like to sing praises for our program.
Does it help that they have women's wrestling right there along the coast? I mean, Washington kicks out a lot. California, do you think that helps with your recruiting?
Guaranteed, for sure, yeah. Yeah, Washington had, I think at their state tournament this year, had over 100 schools represented. And I mean, I haven't been there yet to the California state tournament. I'd like to go one day, but we got a lot of girls on our team from California, and they talk about how tough it is. And yeah, they're kicking a lot of wrestlers, and there's only so many opportunities on the West Coast for four-year schools.
Were you sad when you had to hang it up and whenever you retired to leave wrestling? Because it seems like you're a guy that would continue wrestling as long as you possibly could.
Yeah, well, I don't know if I ever really thought I was retired, because I went to the Olympics in 2000, and I thought, you know, that would be a good time to retire. I missed 2 Olympic teams that I thought I would make. Probably a better wrestler in 96 than I was in 2000, and didn't get to go. So I kept going, thought 2000 I would retire, and then obviously Olympics didn't go the way I wanted to. And the Worlds were going to be in New York City in 2001, so I thought, you know, that would be fun. So I wrestled for another year, made the world team, and then I came home for practice September 11th, and the world changed. And there wasn't going to be a World Championships in New York City, and the idea of going to Sofia, Bulgaria didn't do it for me. I had a new baby at home and everything else, so I decided not to go to the Worlds, but I still thought I might wrestle again. And probably till about, I think 3 years ago, when my heavyweight almost broke my neck at practice, I still kind of felt like I was a wrestler. So there wasn't a moment where I was like, yeah, I'm done with this game forever. I always kind of in my mind thought I could still do it.
You still go live a little bit in practice?
Not for a while. Once a year, maybe. The other thing is, I think it's a lot easier transition when you're going from wrestler to coach. You're still in the room. You're still living the wrestling lifestyle. You're still traveling. You're still going to tournaments. You're still seeing your friends all the time. And it's the guys, I think, that they quit wrestling or retire and they cold turkey, they're off it. That's probably a bigger transition for them.
You want to keep this lifestyle of being a coach going for quite a while?
Well, I'm 49, so I'm still haven't decided what I want to be when I grow up. I don't think I really want to grow up, so I love wrestling. I love being around it. And when you're an athlete, there's always ways to get better. So no matter how good you are, you're always toying with your game and your techniques and your tactics. As a coach, there's even more to think about because you got 25 girls and 25 guys, and you're trying to make them all the best they can be. So it's a great profession. But it also is it's a great game. You got to play with yourself every day with your mind to figure out what's going to work and what's not working and just making those changes.
All right, I'll give you a range here, but give me your, I don't want to say favorite, but maybe the best 3 to 5 personalities that have ever gone through Simon Fraser University.
Personalities, wow.
Yeah, like fun, and you interacted with them. You're like, hey, they're fun people to be around.
Yeah, well, we had the one guy on our team. I mentioned him already. His name was John Mellon. He was a 134-pounder. I think he won 2 at 34 and 1 at 42, and then he got second at maybe was already up to 50. But he was kind of a world-class guy at 62 kilos. He was in the mix. I think he might have got top 10 at the Worlds once for Great Britain. But he was, I hope he doesn't watch this, but he was the laziest 136-pounder I'd ever met in my life. I always said he didn't even know where the weight room was, but he loved to wrestle. So he'd get in shape by wrestling. And, he's one of those guys, if the room was open for 6 hours, he'd wrestle for 6 hours. And then when women started wrestling, his second favorite love besides wrestling was women. So if there was ever a woman in the room, he would wrestle like twice as hard because he thinks she might be watching him. And he was my roommate, but he was the funniest guy we had on the team. And I think a lot of the things that were funny were just funny because of his accent. So he was a character. And then on our team, we had Jeff Toohey, was our heavyweight, who was, world-class, retired from the sport of wrestling, I think, at 24 years old with a world bronze and an Olympic silver. But he was 6'6" and 265 pounds, and he liked messing around with people. And when you're that big, you can do it. And so he was always good for a lot of laughs.
You got one more slot there if you want to fill it.
Oh, one more slot, yeah.
You
Well,
only
I think Daniel Legale is one of the great personalities in wrestling all around, because here's a guy who's just a beast on the mat, probably one of the most athletic guys that I've ever wrestled. He was 2 weights below me, but he was no fun at all. But then his personality, it didn't match what people thought about him. He's very soft-spoken, very intelligent, and just an interesting guy to be around. Just the fact that he came from such a different background than any of us growing up, in Nigeria, very, very little money, and I think they have 10 brothers and sisters, that sort of thing. So he had a great story.
What do you think of the direction of women's college wrestling right now? WCWA filled a gap there for a while. Now it's split with NAIA and the NCAA schools. Do you like the direction it's going?
Oh, I think the way it's going is the way it has to go, and I think it's going to help us in our professions, having it known. Like for me, I coach at a school, we're NCAA, and now NCAA is going to recognize women's wrestling. It's going to help us probably get more funding, maybe secure another coaching position, all those kinds of great things. Unfortunately, right now, maybe we made the jump to splitting them a little early, because there's so many good teams on the NAIA side and so many good teams on the NCAA side. For me, as a competitor, as a coach that likes to see the very best competition, I still like to see, who's the best in college.
Justin, thanks for spending time with us. This is fun to see where your program's going. And I think, man, if people can see the view, if you can see Canada and the ocean in the United States, it sounds like a pretty good recruiting pitch to get people up there.
Yeah, I mean, it was a life-changing moment when I decided to come here. And at that time, I didn't think I was going to make it my home, but it's just a place you could fall in love with very quick, especially if you love outdoors and mountains and oceans and all the beautiful scenery.